Welcome back, sailors and adventurers. Today we're diving into the second installment of our exciting series on crossing the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. If you missed the first video, featuring the legendary captain Eddie O'Malley, who has done this crossing I think, more than 15 times, something crazy. Make sure to check it out and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future updates in this series. In this particular video, we're thrilled to bring you insights from Richard Payne, who recently completed this challenging journey. He'll be sharing his first-hand experiences and valuable tips for those planning to embark on this incredible voyage. Also stay tuned. In our next video, we'll be joined by Sherry McCampbell from sailing vessel Soggy Paws. Some of you may be familiar with her website, an incredible resource for everyone planning or considering this exciting journey. As well as just in general navigating the Southeast Asia and Indian Ocean. Before we dive in, a quick thank you to our sponsor, B33 and Audience Platform. If your business is looking to completely automate billing and how they get paid, accelerate cash flows, remove manual steps, head over to b33.tech, or if you're in media, to audienceplatform.tv and take advantage of their free offer, essentially allowing you to test drive and experience the power of automation in billing and payments. Now, let's set sail with Richard Payne and learn from his recent Red Sea and Indian Ocean crossing adventure. Hey, Richard.
Hey, Steven, how's it going?
Good and good. How are you?
Good.
Thanks, everyone, for coming. So again, we put this together as a part of Rebag Indian Ocean and Red Sea crossing community. It's a series of events to try and help sort of everyone get more information, speak to people that have relevant experiences, useful bits and pieces that may help sort of inform our journey and any plans. And some people are undecided, others are committed. But either way, like the idea is to help share these experiences and make sure that we're all better prepared as sailors. And then an opportunity to just ask questions, right? So Richard has just gone through this journey. He's going to share some interesting stories for all of us, but also the practical information about what not to do, what to definitely do, etc. So this is the second one in the series. We have Richard Payne. So Richard, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your journey, and then it would be great to start with kind of what you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So great to meet you all, even virtually, and I'll be back at Redbach hopefully relatively soon, and it'd be great to continue the conversation in person with many of you, because I've got a lot to learn from you about Southeast Asia as a region to which I'm new. I'd start by saying that in contrast with Eddie, I'm a complete rookie. I bought my first boat in 2021, and the Red Sea Passage was actually my first big ocean crossing. When I left Egypt for the Seychelles in November of 2022. And that was sort of a blessing and a curse, because it was my first big passage, and obviously it's a particularly challenging one. I did a lot of research, and I think I did a lot more research than your average person. That turned out to be pretty useful, and I had people on board who had much more experience, but actually weren't really familiar with some of the specificities of the Red Sea region. So actually, it ended up being kind of a blessing and a curse that it was my first passage. I'm happy to share, my experience of the Red Sea, which it was phenomenal. The biggest mistake that I made, and this is a real common mistake among cruisers, was time. You asked, Steve, what I do. I'm a professor of history, and actually the reason that I bought a boat new in France and kind of did things the wrong way around, going through the Med and then through the Red Sea and then crossing the Indian Ocean, sort of heading around the world the wrong way around, because I'm interested in the history of the Indian Ocean region. And so I want to combine kind of ocean navigation with, historical sources and, the study of the region, its archaeology, and kind of, literary cultures, that kind of thing. So, my work and my navigational interests sort of intersect, which is why it's kind of uncommon for the Red Sea to be a first big passage, but that was the case for me. The Suez Canal was pretty straightforward for me. I thought that the bureaucracy would be more complex. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I speak decent Arabic, and that was a big advantage really throughout the passage. So Egypt, I'm pretty used to dealing with bureaucratically. And so if you kind of brush them off and just really firm with them, they tend to respond pretty well. Actually, the anti-corruption initiative in the Suez seemed to have really yielded significant dividends. There was very little of that. And in fact, they sent around representatives with, nice hats and T-shirts to give away from the Red Sea Authority, asking us if we had experienced any requests for bribes, which of course we did, but I didn't feel like it was worth reporting those guys because they weren't really they weren't as harassing as I typically find Egyptians to be. So it was pretty great. This is before the Ismailia Marina was there. That was just being put in place. So that was kind of a mess because of the construction. But nothing really particularly challenging. They had some mooring bolts that I didn't trust, but whatever. We had someone on watch all night. So Suez was really straightforward. Leaving Suez, that's where we really confronted, the typical kind of Red Sea problem, right? The wind is either behind you or ahead of you. And we luckily had the wind ahead of us the first, 3-4 days, had a very smooth passage, pretty much down almost to the border with Sudan. And that's where we started confronting some headwinds. And that's where I was really happy that I had done my research on the inner passage through Sudan. Now, this might not be as useful for you because I suspect with Saudi Arabia having become much more open and friendly to yachts, a lot of you will be going up, the Saudi side of the coast. But I have to say this, the Sudanese coast was just absolutely a wonderful surprise for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's gorgeous. There are beautiful anchorages. We didn't have much time to stop, but really fantastically beautiful coast, kind of like Tahiti in the desert, just these beautiful reefs. I mean, it's a region that I would love to go back to and really cruise properly. I didn't have time in 2022. But the big advantage navigationally was that inner passage was completely protected from, big seas. We had really big seas that year. I noticed right now, it was around the same time actually, and right now things look pretty nice. We had 3-4 meter waves coming through the middle of the Red Sea. So that was, I've got a 12-meter catamaran, right? So that's pretty uncomfortable, and potentially sort of, potentially dangerous, I guess, if you had a big outlier swell. So I went for the inner passage. This is where there was some debate with my crew, right, who had done, had many, many tens of thousands more ocean miles than me. And they really wanted to stay out, in the middle of the Red Sea. And I said, no way, we're doing the inner passage. I'd done my research. I had the Google Maps, the satellite imagery, and really, really useful, for me at least, was the handwritten charts in the Red Sea Pilot Guide, which were super accurate, really helpful in combination with the satellite imagery. That sort of set me up. I found the depths to be more or less accurate. If you want to go into details, there's one spot where the depths were shallower than on the handwritten chart. And there was no sort of tidal discrepancy to account for that. There was no big tide to account for that discrepancy, I should say. So that was one little problematic spot, which was okay for me because, got 1.3 meter draft, but could be an issue with a larger draft vessel. But in general, I found those handwritten charts extremely helpful. And that made the whole coast of Sudan just an absolute delight. Like, it was just wonderful. It was beautiful. Nice anchorages, no problems at all, no unexpected hazards, smooth sailing because you've got a lot of protection from the reefs. So you're just on flat water. I had my whenever we had favorable winds, I had my Jennifer out. We were just awesome, just champagne sailing the whole way.
Is it possible to talk through some of the political, like checking in, checking out? How did you feel the safety in Sudan, moving up and down the Sudanese coast? Did you feel like there were any issues in terms of, I don't know?
Yeah, going back to Egypt, I guess, the one big disappointment for me was the challenges in getting a cruising permit and the costs associated. I really had wanted to stop at, Hurghada and, various spots on the Egyptian coast, and it was just prohibitively expensive. And I'm sure you guys have heard about this. And that's where maybe the Saudi coast, given the relaxation of the regulations, as far as I've understood from the Red Sea passage making kind of group on Facebook, things have gotten a lot easier on the Saudi coast, which might make it much more interesting from a cruising perspective. But as you probably know, the big disappointment in Egypt was all the costs and fees associated with stopping, even at a place like Hurghada, which has a marina. And
like when you say, we've heard that a couple of times, and I was talking to someone here yesterday, like when you say prohibitively expensive, what does that mean? Is that like $5,000? Is it, 10,
yeah, well, we'll put it this way. I couldn't get anyone to really commit on the prices, but they were all ballpark and they were in the thousands, which to me seemed was unreasonable. You know, I wasn't going to stop. I wasn't going to pay that much to stop in Hurghada.
When you left the bottom of the Suez, you then just sailed straight till you got to Sudan. You made no stops at all along the border.
I didn't make any stops until we got to Suakin. So if you guys can see this.
And how, as far as the Egyptians were concerned, how close to their coast were you able to sail, or did you just stay in the main shipping channels down the middle?
I stayed pretty close to the coast, actually, and they didn't seem to mind much. There wasn't really, the regulations were not very strict. I mean, we had checked out of Egypt, but we were working with the agent. I think it was, I've forgotten now, I think it was Ahab Sukar. There's like two big agents. You know, they're both really well known and I think have a similar reputation. And there weren't really much in the way of regulations, you know, as long as you stay away from the coast. The one place you want to stay clear of is up here, Berenike, which is very disappointing for me because it's an archaeological site that, you know, I've written about and thought about quite a bit. So I would have loved to go into this harbor here, but it's a big Navy base. So that's a place you want to stay well clear of. In fact, you know, let me walk that back a little bit. You know, going down the coast from, you know, Port Khalib, I'd say on average we were about 20 to 60 miles out, and then went sort of straight down from here. So this the whole section, the southern part of Egypt to the Sudanese border, which is here, is a bit more sensitive. We didn't get really firm guidelines about, you know, any problems getting too close to the coast. So I didn't really worry about it too much, but we took pretty much a straight shot down here, staying clear of these islands, which are great diving spots. You know, that's one of the disappointments of not being able to stop if you're a diver in particular, because there's some phenomenal places that it would be great. And it might be possible to work something out with the Egyptian authorities, but to me, it didn't seem worth it. So once I got rough quotes from Port Khalib and from Hurghada, I gave up on the idea of stopping in Egypt.
So you made a great shot then from Port Suez to Port Said.
Well, to Suakin.
Oh, Suakin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that on?
I wouldn't stop in. I think it's just general knowledge. And Port Sudan is kind of a mess. They're quite sensitive, I think, to visiting yachts there. I wouldn't. But Suakin is great. Now, and I am not totally up to date on what the situation has been the last few months, but I know up until quite recently, yachts have been stopping there without an issue. And Mohammed, the agent there, is great. Doesn't charge a lot. Phenomenal provisioning. There's a market there where you can buy, you know, vegetables and meat and kind of basic consumer goods. I mean, obviously we're in Sudan, right? So you're not going to have like a Carrefour, but you know, we were able to buy most of what we needed, except booze, which if you need, you could go to Port Sudan from Suakin to buy alcohol. But although Suakin had everything we needed, and it was pretty easy to refill our canisters, which wasn't a big problem for us because we actually had pretty good wind as far as Suakin down here.
And how long did it take? About a week.
Go ahead, sorry.
Suez to Suakin?
Yeah, so I don't have my log. It's on the boat with me, but yeah, my recollection is about a week.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say about 5 days is about right. While I have this map out, let me just show you the inner passage here. Double check what I'm saying with the Red Sea pilot guide, which I don't have with me because the handwritten chart is, again, I found that really, really useful for the whole Sudanese coast. But you kind of cut through here. And then you have all this protection the whole way down. You've got all these reefs. This spot here between this island and the coast was, if my memory serves me correctly, the spot where the depth was significantly shallower than it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be 3 meters and it was about 1.5, which would be a problem for a lot of boats. But this whole inner passage was just really smooth. And again, just to follow that handwritten guide from the Red Sea pilot. And then you get a little bit of traffic around Port Sudan, of course, right? It's the major port, one of the biggest ports in Northeast Africa, but, you know, nothing major, nothing complicated. And Suakin here was just great.
Was that your only stop in Sudan?
Yeah. Which, if I could go back and do it again, I would have taken a month to just for the Sudanese coast, because you have all of these sort of, they call them marsas, these, I mean, Suakin is one of them, right? These sort of channels that go in and you can anchor very peacefully. Lots of, I mean, I've heard the diving is incredible. Yeah, Suakin is a beautiful little anchorage here. You come in on this side, it's right here, basically. In fact, looks like you could see some boats there. But yeah, Suakin, Muhammad was great. Megan, very reasonable. He even got us a yellow fever vaccine document that one of my crew needed. You know, he was very experienced at solving any kind of problems you might face. So I'd highly recommend him if the security situation allows, which obviously is something that's changing pretty quickly. Well, we clear into Sudan, but you know, Mohammed organizes all that, so you don't really have to deal with customs or immigration there at all. You know, they don't even stamp your passports; they just give you a kind of pass. So it's you know, he's done a good job of minimizing the bureaucratic process there. Whereas if you were to go to Port Sudan, I think it would be a completely different story, especially in the context of the current war.
Did you provision diesel?
Yeah, no problem. Tested the quality. Quality was good. You know, obviously this whole region, if you can use a filter. You know, obviously it's not going to solve every potential problem with diesel quality, but you know, we actually had, I was surprised. You know, we filtered the diesel and there was no water, nothing. Yeah, seemed like reasonably good quality fuel and very well priced in Suakin. Yeah, I forgot exactly what I paid for diesel in Suakin, but it was a lot less than it would later become in Djibouti. And that was the last spot that I refueled, which, as I'll mention, did cause some problems in the end, because we were nervous about running low. We didn't actually run out of fuel, but we were close enough that we asked for fuel, and that got us into some trouble in Eritrea.
How many liters do you have?
So I've got two 200-liter tanks, and I took about 300 in addition.
I ask how much you actually used in the Red Sea Passage.
Well, from Suakin to Djibouti, I used very nearly all of it.
Are you about what, 3 liters an hour? What?
Yeah, 3 to 4.
3 to 4. Okay.
About 3 to 4. Running, you know, with a catamaran running one engine. I was able to get from Suakin to Djibouti, but barely. I mean, by the time we were close to Djibouti, because once we got around here, and you mean if you look at just the weather map, right? When you've got you know, the southerlies going up through the Red Sea, it's right around here that you start to encounter them, which is pretty typical for this season. So for you guys heading up, you know, this is where you might start facing headwinds. Whereas for me, this is where the you know, it was pretty much continuously headwinds from here to Djibouti, which also explains the fuel consumption. So the rest of Sudan was easy, no issues. Where things started to become a problem is turning this corner, right where the border with Eritrea is. That's where I started dealing with pretty big seas, you know, between 2 and 3 meters. It was enough to really slow our headway, and the wind was just coming right on the nose. And so spent a day or so trying to tack against it, and we were making so little headway that I essentially gave up and decided to take the inner passage through Eritrea. Right here at the border, 14 miles out, I started radioing the Eritrean Navy. You know, I didn't really expect much of a response, although we actually got one. And one thing I did that turned out to be smart was videotaping myself radioing the Eritrean Coast Guard and Navy repeatedly, you know, with the time indicated on the phone, time and date, you know, to demonstrate to the authorities that we had made a good faith effort to make contact with them. Within about 2 hours of my first radio attempt, a little skiff comes out of nowhere. You know, it's like out of some like Somali pirate video, you know, some kids with machine guns, basically. There was admittedly an Eritrean flag in tatters attached to the skiff, but you know, these kids didn't have any uniforms. And that's where, you know, having some knowledge, I mean, I'd done some research. I'd talked to some Turkish sailors who'd done the Red Sea. I spent a lot of time in Turkey before this passage and had read all the accounts I could find. There had been a Turkish vessel that had been arrested and impounded in Massawa in Eritrea. But yeah, I spent a lot of time in the Middle East and, you know, politically disturbed parts of the Middle East, right? So I'm not easily fazed by this stuff. The rest of my crew was, you know, they were kind of panicking. So even though they had way more experience than me in terms of navigation and passage making, they didn't have the same political experience in the Middle East, you know, which is that you just be really nice to these guys. And I think it's really useful to have some basic Arabic greetings, assalamu alaikum, you know, this kind of stuff, you know, just to show some kind of respect. I think that really helps to structure the initial encounter and to treat these guys like, you know, Yeah, they have their authority, right? So if you respect their authority, they are much more likely to be friendly to you and helpful. And that was helpful. In Eritrea, by the way, pretty much everyone speaks Arabic. There's almost no English knowledge. Although, as I'll if I'll talk about my experience with the Eritrean Navy, the officer corps actually speaks pretty good English, which was sort of surprising. But if you make any encounter with the authorities here, having a little bit of Arabic really goes a long way. Or just having whatever Google Translate Arabic downloaded to your phone, so you don't need data for it, for example. I think that would be really helpful. So I was able to communicate with these kids. I explained to them, we radioed, I explained our intentions. They just wanted to know that we had no intention of making of stopping. Basically, they didn't want us to anchor. They didn't want us to go into port. They wanted to we made clear we're not going to the main port in Massawa. That my intention was to pass through the Dakhla Islands, basically taking the inner passage. And I explained, because of the wave height and the swell, and they were like, fine, continue. I tried to use kind of technical language, like, do you have to have permission to continue? And they're like, whatever, just continue. And then after that, about every day, someone would come visit us. And it would always be different. It makes sense, right? You're 100 miles south, it'd be a different little Coast Guard vessel. But again, these Coast Guard vessels are just skiffs that look, super unseaworthy, with a couple kids with some really old AKs. It's pretty basic operation. But as far as I could tell, they meant well. I was able to communicate with them, no problems. And that happened every day along the Eritrean coast. And again, same issue. They wanted to make sure we had no intention of stopping. They wanted to make sure we were not planning on anchoring in Dakhla. I think it's worth knowing, politically speaking, the Dakhla Islands, this archipelago, which could be one of the world's great cruising grounds, but it is a political minefield. I mean, I don't mean literally a minefield, that it's mined, but no one really knows what's happening there. You hear different rumors from different people in the intelligence communities, right? They say the Israelis have a base there. Some people say the Iranians have a base there. Some people say the Russians or the Americans. Everyone sort of wants to have a base in Dakhla for obvious, the geopolitical significance of the archipelago is obvious, and the Eritreans do not have the capacity to conduct effective surveillance in Dakhla. So the rumor is there's all sorts of stuff going on there that the Eritreans can't control. And that's why they're so sensitive about vessels passing through their waters in general, and passing through the Dakhla archipelago in particular. Yeah, I would steer well clear of Dakhla to the extent that you can. And obviously the same applies to the Yemeni side. I guess that goes without saying, right? I don't think anyone plans to show up to the port at Hodeidah anytime soon. Just, I've heard rumors, and this is from the Red Sea group, that Jazan in Saudi Arabia has opened up, which would be, the Khorasan Islands would be an incredible cruising ground. It's not a region that's well known. I only know the region because of the archaeology, so I know the field work that has been done there, and it just looks absolutely fabulous. But I couldn't get any kind of information from the Saudi authorities, so that's why I decided to take the other side of the Red Sea, the western side, and go down. And another time I would love to do the Saudi coast. But just to flag that, if you can get permission to go to Khorasan, that would be an incredible cruising ground. So back to Eritrea. As you go further south down the coast, it becomes more sensitive. Again, every day going down the coast, someone would visit. As I got further down the coast, you're dealing with actual Navy vessels. So Asab is the big Navy base. And so the closer you get to Asab, the more of a professional Navy you're dealing with, which of course creates problems of its own. And around this point, a vessel came out, stopped us. Let's see if this will zoom in. Basically, there's a little Navy base. Oh, you see where that road ends? So that road leads to a Navy base. So I was sort of up here off of one of these islands, actually, trying to stay as far off the coast as I could while avoiding the swell. And Navy vessel came out and demanded that we come here and anchor, and ended up spending about 6 hours on anchor waiting for them. They took passports, and I think they had to take the passports back to the authorities and the base and, basically check us out, make sure we were legit. Didn't really have any issue. They came back. Everything was fine. They told us to go. So everything sort of seemed fine. And then one of my, crew members, started asking for fuel. And I was kind of pissed off because I having run the calculations, I thought we had plenty of fuel to get through the straits, at least to the beginning of the border with Djibouti, which is up here, right? So, and once you get over the border, Djibouti has a relatively robust sort of infrastructure. I mean, relatively, right? So, if we ran out of fuel in the straits past the border with Djibouti, we would be fine. That was my calculation. And I was really pissed when he asked for more fuel because what that did is create an anxiety among the naval authorities that we were going to run out of fuel in their waters, right? Which they did not want. Then basically they said, well, you need fuel. And, at that point, they already thought we needed fuel. And then they required us to go into Assab. And basically we were escorted by a Navy vessel into the port of Assab here, where we were, basically arrested. They didn't take us to jail. They threatened to. But, they're pretty friendly. I mean, they threatened to just like, don't get off the boat. If you get off the boat, you're going to jail. You're under arrest, but we'll allow you to stay on the boat. It wasn't really, again, this is where my crew had no experience of this, right? So they're kind of panicking and freaking out and complaining. And I'm like, so, I basically told them to just calm down. I'd read enough accounts of this happening in Eritrea not to be worried. There's really no reason to worry. I mean, I know a little bit of the politics of the region. To me, it makes perfect sense that the Eritreans have a lot of anxiety about their coastline. Ethiopia has invaded them in the past precisely to take Assab. They threaten every couple of weeks to invade Eritrea to take the port of Assab. So they have really legitimate reasons to worry about intelligence gathering along their coastline, and not to mention other powers active in the region. Yeah, they're really sensitive. If you respond to them politely, respectfully, they'll pretty much do the same. Once we were in Assab, they took us into this. It's a pretty nasty port, the Dubai Port World or whatever it's called, DP World or whatever. They're rebuilding part of the port, so there's some sections of the port actually have decent protection, but we were put on these like really, really messy pier. You can imagine it was really a mess. So we did our best to kind of with some degree of security, but I did incur some damage there. One thing I would say is entering harbors and in this region, right, it's really good to have as much extra fenders. I had a big piece of wood that I put outside of my fenders, which actually here was kind of a lifesaver. Otherwise, I would have had a lot more damage to my jail coat than I did. And that's just true kind of in general. I mean, obviously, you're not going into port unless you can avoid it. But there are some places like here where, the authorities want you to tie up, and, having as much protection as you can will help save your boat some damage. In Assab, they took the passports. Didn't really give us a lot of information for the first couple of days. They also took all of our electronic devices. I mean, clearly they're worried about espionage, right? I mean, they're not trying to take advantage of yachts passing through. They're just worried about espionage. So they took all of our electronic devices, passports, came back the next day. They brought us beer, which, I have to say was kind of a highlight of the trip because they brew the original Moretti Italian beer. I didn't realize it's actually originally brewed in Eritrea, and they have the original recipe. Fantastic. They brought us fantastic beer. They were as friendly as they could be. It took about 3 or 4 days for us to get permission to leave. One problem there was that, the American, so I had a crew that was American, British. My son is Swedish. My then girlfriend was Russian. The Western embassies would not deal with us at all. They wouldn't even answer the calls. They wouldn't respond. I had Starlink to send emails to these people. Nothing. The Russian embassy was actually very helpful to us. They made calls. They actually agitated on our behalf, which was kind of surprising. But yeah, I think the Russians might have helped us get out sooner than we otherwise would have, to be honest. So, I would suggest in all of these countries, especially given the political context, have the numbers of all of the embassies of your crew members for each country, written down somewhere, especially if you don't have Starlink or if in our case, I don't think they knew what the Starlink was. So they didn't have us shut it down. Or they didn't take it. yeah, I would be prepared for those sort of political problems. And, again, there are embassies out there that will surprise you. I had read accounts of people being stuck for a week or 2 weeks. In one case of a Turkish vessel, they were stuck in Massawa, not in Assab, for a month. So, I kind of kept my cool because, you don't really have status power over you. Like, what are you going to do? I knew that we were safe. Fundamentally, it was just a matter of how much time it was going to take to get the approval to leave. They let us leave. They let us buy a couple of canisters of diesel just for security's sake, and we left. So I told Steve, like how to get arrested in Eritrea and have a good time. It wasn't that bad, honestly. It was. They were very professional, and again, the Navy officers that we had to deal with actually spoke perfect English. And in fact, one of them is still sort of a WhatsApp friend. He writes me every now and then. Yeah, I don't know. Do you guys have any questions about the Eritrean experience?
Avoid Eritrea.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to ask. If the sea state allowed, can you go further out and kind of avoid this? Like, is it, or even it kind of doesn't matter how far out you are, they're going to come get you either way?
No, I think you got to be pretty close to the coast. My suspicion was that the 14-mile mark, or whatever the kind of international, was it 14 or 12? I don't think that matters much to them. I think they just don't want you coming that close. I mean, I think if you're in the middle of the straits, no, they're not going to care. They're not going to come out and look for you. So it's only, I think, for navigational purposes that you would find yourself in Eritrean waters. And I suspect, right, heading northward, as will be your case, that it's not that relevant, except that, of course, you're going to want to stay clear of the Hanish Islands, and obviously stay clear of this part of Yemen. I mean, we could talk separately about Socotra, but this part of Yemen, obviously, I don't think I need to elaborate. You want to stay pretty far away from there, and it's, that's a pretty narrow, right? So you might find yourself in Eritrean water. You might find there's lots of reasons why these naval authorities might become more proactive in checking on boats.
In that particular area, do you know where the international shipping lanes are? Where do the big boats go?
Oh yeah, they cut straight through here.
Oh, so they don't go on the Yemen side. They can actually go on the Eritrea side. That's pretty.
Now they don't go on the Yemen side because this is the Houthi controlled. Hudaydah
Right.
is the port controlled by the Houthis.
Right.
So I think at least my recollection is they go on this side of the Hanish Islands. But I didn't see any big shipping because we were staying closer to the coast to avoid the sea state. So I didn't see any big shipping until we came out of Assab and really entered the middle of the straits, which makes sense, right?
I just figured you probably stick to where the big ships are. They're going to be used to seeing that, right? They'll be used to seeing ships going.
Absolutely.
You may not.
I don't think you're going to have any issue. And again, you guys are going northwards, so I think the problem in this is this. These northerly winds. The southerly winds, and the swell is so big that it's just but that's going to be behind you probably. So for the next few months. I mean, of course, the Red Sea is a little bit of a mess sometimes, but here it's pretty predictable in this season, right? In the north, in the northeast monsoon season, the wind kind of goes straight through, the Gulf of Aden and then channels up into the straits. So, you guys, I think you're going to have an easier time of this. But I would just say if you do encounter them, just don't make assumptions that they have any bad intentions, right? They're just concerned about their maritime security, and if you're friendly to them, they'll be friendly back. I say that because I have read reports of sailors sort of saying, again, that's why I mentioned the skiff with a couple guys with machine guns, right? It sort of looks threatening, but that's what their Coast Guard is, right? I mean, it's a catastrophically poor country, so that's what they can marshal as a Coast Guard. And their intentions, I think, are pretty reasonable. They just want to make sure that nothing, there's a lot of illicit trafficking happening in these waters as well, right? So it's not just direct security threats or intelligence gathering. It's also, good old-fashioned trafficking across the straits that they want to police. So, I think if you encounter them, just assume that their intentions are reasonable, and you'll have a reasonable interaction. And I think the same applies to the Yemeni authorities. I mean, obviously, it's a much more complicated landscape, but from everything that I've read, there's no indication that the Houthi authorities have any interest in harassing cruising yachts. And if you do encounter them, which is very unlikely, I think the same principle would apply, that they just want to make sure that you're not a threat to them or trafficking something that's a threat to them. I think having a kind of working assumption that these guys might look threatening, but the working presumption should be that they're not, unless you have reason to believe otherwise.
Are there a lot of fishing vessels and nets and other marine traffic in that area?
Yeah, great question. Some fishing vessels, not a lot. No nets or FADs, or you call them FADs, or all the stuff that you're used to in Southeast Asia. I saw very, very little of. The fishermen in the straits here are very friendly. They're at least all of the fishermen that I met were Yemeni. They will come close to your boat, and what they want is alcohol in exchange for fish, in my experience. And again, I had a lot of issues with my crew because my crew sort of assumed that everyone getting close to the boat was a terrorist. And I can kind of understand them. But, if you talk to these guys, all they really want is alcohol. I mean, they wanted to trade beer or alcohol for fish. Because in Yemen, especially the Emirati controlled parts of Yemen, that's, it's kind of borderline Al-Qaeda. The South Yemen, which mostly controlled by the Emirates and its allies, and Saudi Arabia and its allies, it's increasingly become a kind of Islamist society. So, these fishermen are just, they're normal people like us, right? So when they see foreigners, they're like, okay, I can get alcohol again, right? Because they've basically made it impossible to get alcohol in southern Yemen. From there, Djibouti is straightforward. I think, as you all know, I wish I had time to cruise Djibouti more than I did. If you have the time to stop, I've traveled Djibouti, previously before this passage, and just a fantastic country to rent a car and drive around for a few days or a week if time allows. There's an Asian, Aksan. He gets the job done. I was in a hurry, and he did help me get things done quickly, but he ended up asking for just an obscene amount. I mean, I think I ended up paying him $900 or something. Which, in hindsight, I wish I'd been less in a hurry, which, basically is true for probably every aspect of this passage, but which I think is a pretty conventional sort of mistake to make, especially for a beginner. But, I'm the kind of guy that's got to go back to work at a certain date, right? So I have a limited amount of time for passage making. Djibouti, I wish I had just cleared it myself, because you could do so. So I met I met a couple French boats there that, had cleared themselves in without paying an agent. So if you have the patience to do that, it's pretty easy. All the offices are right there in the port. And I don't think you actually need an agent for Djibouti. Just that's my instinct. And I met boats then, and I don't think the situation's really changed. The customs, immigration authorities, they're all on the main dock. It's pretty easy to do. So, all of us are trying to minimize costs on these passages. So that might be one way to do it. But if you do need the assistance of an agent, then Ahsan, he does a good job. It's right in here. That's the main port office. If I remember right, so we anchored out here, and the port immigration office is somewhere up in here. But if you go around, ask around, I mean, Djibouti's fantastic, right? You can get everything you want. It's not cheap, but you've got your Carrefour, you got your French grocery store. You can buy pretty much whatever you want. You can go to the Sheraton or the Kempinski bar and meet intelligence agents from all over the world and military guys, and it's probably a really good place to get information about what's going on, right? For the north, because all these military guys drink at the same bar. I remember a night out in Djibouti once where I was talking to a Russian, a Chinese, and an American military officer all hanging out. We all got drunk together. It's a fantastic place for that. So it's a good place to get information about what's happening in the Straits. And if there are things to worry about, you'll hear it in Djibouti. Diesel, I forgot the exact price. It was pretty costly in my recollection. And I had to buy a lot. So maybe that's why I was grimacing when I faced the agents fee. So yeah, but otherwise, I think Djibouti is straightforward. It's an easy place and kind of so far at least, an island of peace in an otherwise unstable region.
You've mentioned paying for things a few times. What is the best way? Like, are you carrying U.S. dollars? Are you going to ATM, pulling out local currency? Is it wise?
Great.
What's the best way to deal with that?
Great question. So I took a ton of dollars, a ton. I mean, I think I brought like $8,000 cash just for emergencies. Sudan, I exchanged dollars for the local currency. There was no ATM. Djibouti, again, Djibouti is very modern, right? They have good infrastructure. So Djibouti, it's no problem to get cash from the bank, and you can use credit cards for everything. Eritrea, which you're not going to visit, I hope. I was able to buy the beer with dollars. Let's see, where else is this relevant?
So U.S. dollars is really the traded currency around that. It works everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think euros would work as well, but euros and dollars. In Socotra as well, you're going to need euros or dollars for fuel or provisions.
And what about how dealing with the canal and paying for all that?
The canal I paid by bank transfer to the agent, although there was partly, and then there was also then I paid the rest in cash. For provisioning and so on, you can get Egyptian pounds from ATMs in Egypt. I think you can get dollars, but I'm not sure about that. But if I remember correctly, I paid the fees and most of the agent's fee by bank transfer before arriving in Egypt, and then had dollars for other essentials. In Suez, the agent will get kind of whatever you need. You can give them a shopping list. My agent overcharged me pretty significantly, which, whatever, I was short on time. But if you have more time, you can be, it's not difficult in Egypt to buy whatever you need yourself, which in hindsight I would have done. But yeah, so except for the Suez agent, everything is where you can use a bank transfer. Everything else was, dollars or euros, or in Djibouti, you can use a credit card and easily take money out from an ATM. On these passages, I always bring more cash than I could need. Maybe that's just from my time spent in Iraq and Afghanistan, where I think it's valuable to be able to bribe people if you need to. I mean, that's not necessarily advice I'm giving, but that's just how I view places where there's significant political instability. Cash can solve a lot of problems.
How long did the passage take you from, say, when you came out of the canal and down to?
It's about 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Including the detour to Eritrea.
Including the detour. Okay.
Yeah. That's I don't have my log in front of me. But let's see. I started around this week of November from Egypt, I'd say around the 20th of November. And I got to the Seychelles like right on the 24th of December. So all in all, the passage took, about 5 weeks. Because I spent a few days in Egypt getting things ready. So we left around now. So the passage took about 5 weeks total. And that included about 4 or 5 days, I want to say, in Djibouti, just for a crew change and to do some repairs, that kind of thing. We spent about 4 days, I think, in Djibouti. And then from there, it was about a week, straight shot to Socotra. I'll leave out, I have heard people stopping in Aden. I can't imagine doing that right now, personally, but the Emiratis do have a lot of control over certain parts of Yemen. So, the political landscape is fluctuating. But I wouldn't trust. I wouldn't trust reports that the Emiratis have control, because the Emiratis use groups like Al Qaeda. They use Islamist groups basically to enforce their control in Yemen. So I have read, the Emiratis control Aden, it's safe to stop there. I'm very skeptical of that idea. I don't think they actually have any kind of authority or any kind of complete authority that I would trust. Socotra is a different story, as you guys know, right? Socotra is controlled by the Emirates, and there are no paramilitaries or anything in Socotra, so it's totally safe, peaceful island. I stopped there. Again, it's another place where I really wish I had more time. I guess before talking about Socotra, sorry, I should talk about the kind of the Gulf of Aden, where we stayed just outside of the shipping lanes, but within sight of the shipping lane. I did not turn off my AIS. I followed the advice that I'd gotten from what's the acronym? GM, the British authority, the GMKTO. UKTO. So their advice was not to turn off AIS and to stay in contact. We had radio contact with. There was an air patrol daily, at least once a day. Probably more than once a day, but at least once a day, we were in radio contact. Usually it was a Japanese plane just checking on us. So it felt very secure. And obviously this is 2022. So it was a different political environment. I think now obviously it's more tense, and I can't really, I don't have experience recently there. So I don't want to say, I don't want to say anything misleading. But at that time it seemed pretty chill, and we had, our daily radio contact. I once saw something in the water that I think had to be a sea drone, which was a little bit terrifying, but I suspect that was used by the Americans or the French for surveillance. It felt very secure. I didn't, but obviously the situation is different now. So, you'll be talking to people that have more recent experience, I hope, and also talking to the relevant authorities. But, as you know, there's a lot of mixed signals, right? I mean, just in the Red Sea group that, was it Wayne administers, which is awesome, incredible resource. But, there's a lot of ambiguity in those stories, right? So really figuring out what's happening is hard. So, but I don't really have anything to add to that. Socotra was fantastic. I wish I had more time to spend there, as I said. Incredibly beautiful place. Refueling was easy. The agent, Ghanem al-Sapotri, great guy, very helpful. We were able to refuel. The authorities were fine. They wanted to be bribed in alcohol. So there's a real pattern of Yemenis have a taste for booze. But yeah, great experience there. The harbor is not well protected. This is part of what explains the historical isolation of Socotra, is that it does not have any good natural harbors. So we were in here, I believe. Now I'm actually second guessing myself. It was one of these spots along the coast, but you could see you've got no protection from the north. There's another spot up here. Actually, this is probably where it was. Yeah, this is it. So you have this jetty, which gives you a little bit of protection, but it's really bad holding in here. I've got a Rachna that has almost never dragged, and this spot we could not get the anchor set, which is unnerving in a place with so little protection from the north. So if you're planning on stopping for an extended period, I would make sure you have an arrangement for, if you want to go see the island, which again is one of the kind of coolest places on earth, I think, make sure you have someone who can stay on board and keep an eye on things, and make sure you've got a really stable weather window. In my case, the weather was turning. There was a storm coming in off the Arabian Sea. So after having arrived, within about 6 hours, I made the decision to leave and head to the Seychelles to try to get ahead of the storm, which ended up being the right decision, because actually I heard from the agent, Ghanem, that the port got hit really badly in that storm. So stopping in Socotra is great for refueling, for provisioning. You can also do crew changes there. There is an airport with, I think, weekly or bi-weekly flights to Dubai. There's also a ferry you can take from this port to Salalah in Oman, although I wouldn't recommend that ferry unless you are, let's say, really, really tough, or interested in really tough travel. It's very local, but in theory, it's possible. So there are ways to get off of Socotra to Oman or to Dubai if you need a crew change for whatever reason. I actually had a crew member leave in Socotra, and Ghanem was able to organize that. But yeah, just keep your eye on the weather. I mean, historically, there's another port over here, which could in theory be useful. But I have never heard of anyone stopping there. I think it's actually in the pilot guide. This is also an ancient port that was used, which would be more protected in the season that we have beginning right now. But yeah, just keep in mind how unprotected that and bad holding the one sort of sanctioned port is for visiting yachts in Socotra. Otherwise, a fantastic experience. After that, I just headed straight for the Seychelles. That was a beautiful sort of 8-day passage. We had a bit of a storm the first day, as I mentioned, but no big deal. And then it was really smooth sailing all the way to the Seychelles. And from there, which takes us down here. And then from there I went up down to Comoros and up the East African coast, and then back across, and that's how I ended up in Rebok, and then now in Phuket. So yeah, I guess I'll stop there. I guess it might be relevant. You guys are probably planning on stopping in Sri Lanka. I should say I had an awesome experience in Galle. I'm sure a number of you have been there already. I'd never been to Sri Lanka, and I didn't really expect much. I just wanted to refuel. Galle was just awesome. Beautiful town. The harbor is filthy, but it's safe. The agent, I can give you his name, did an awesome job. And in Galle, the nice thing is everything is within, so they tuck you really far back. I mean, I'm mentioning this, just stop me if this is not relevant. But it's obviously a logical stop when you're leaving from Malaysia or Thailand. So they tuck you up into here, this spot. And then on this major road up here, you can get everything. Just incredible provisioning within like 10 minutes walk from the port. The agent organized diesel at a really reasonable rate and a minimal delivery fee delivered right to the boat. I refilled my gas canisters in right around the corner from here. Literally everything I could imagine doing, I was able to do within 15 minutes of the port. And then Galle town is just delightful. So, those of you who want to plan, visitors, family or whatever who want to come say hello while you're on passage, I highly recommend Galle. Really, really wonderful experience. So, I'll stop there. And happy to address any questions I can.
Did you stop at the Maldives at all?
No, I decided not to, just because of the costs. It didn't seem, well, I don't like Mahe very much. It's kind of a dirty port, not that nice. And so it would have been relatively cheap to just come into Mahe and come out. But if I was going to stop, I wanted to do some cruising, and that ended up being too costly for me. So I decided not to do it. Ulugan, I guess, is a different story. What I wanted to do was to go into, because I was coming from the Seychelles. So I spent almost a year in East Africa and Tanzania and Kenya, which I loved, and I almost regret leaving. Like I should have spent another year there. But I went Kenya, Seychelles, from Seychelles to Sri Lanka, and I planned on stopping in what's that? Gan, the southernmost atoll. And Gan, I think, is just like Ulugan, the northernmost atoll. It's a great place to stop for 2 days, provision, and leave. But I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to cruise. So I wanted to go to Gan and then cruise up to Mahe and then over to Sri Lanka. And there, I was looking at prices in the thousands for cruising permits and fees and so on. And crew change, every crew change was costly. So I decided not to do it because for me, the Maldives, it's kind of like, I don't know, I've been there before. Every atoll sort of feels like more or less the same. Didn't excite me as much. And I'm actually glad I had more time to spend in Sri Lanka.
I just make a cautionary note about Galle in Sri Lanka. We had friends of ours, an American boat, that was hit by a commercial vessel whilst in Galle Harbor. That was quite a painful situation for them and expensive.
So speaking of accidents, incidents, did you have insurance for all of this trip, parts of this trip? Like what was available?
Yeah. I've always had insurance for everything. My boat's a pretty big chunk of my personal savings and I can't afford to risk it. So, I had Howden out of Hong Kong insure me for the Red Sea passage. And they've also insured me for the Malaysian passage, from East Africa to Malaysia. And now I've just renewed with EIS, which is great for the Mediterranean and apparently Southeast Asia. Actually, they gave me a great rate, way better than Howden. But I don't think they're covering the Red Sea. So I actually had to cancel my policy with them because I was doing the Red Sea. Actually, no, I misspoke. They gave me some crazy proposal where I was allowed to stop in Suez and in Yemen. They approved Aden as a port. And I called them up and I said, "You guys are crazy. It's a civil war." And they wouldn't budge. They wouldn't allow me to stop in Sudan. And that's so I canceled my EIS insurance. So it might be worth talking to EIS because they might have changed their tune. But I just got a policy with them to do Southeast Asia with the option of going back to Mauritius and then Madagascar and then South Africa. So yeah.
Can I ask what flag your vessel is? Under what?
Polish. Polish. Yeah, I got a Polish flag. And the boat's owned by a British company, and then I'm American. So that creates some opportunities for insurance, but also creates some obstacles.
Hi, Richard, you mentioned a great agent in Gaul. Who was it?
Yeah, I think it's Achinta, if I remember correctly. But
yeah.
I can look it up and send it to Steve, who can share with everyone in the, or I can put it into the Redbox community group chat if you like.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, he's young. He's succeeding to his father, and he really seems to want to make a reputation for himself. So he went the extra mile with every possible request, which usually they usually want more money for extra tasks. So at least that's my case in Djibouti and other places. So I've kind of I'm not real keen on using agents anymore, frankly. They could be avoided, but in Sri Lanka I had a good experience.
Thanks. Right.
And then provisioning in Djibouti is mostly market. Is that correct? Like there's no real stores or?
Oh no, they're great stores. So you have a Carrefour.
Sorry, not in Djibouti. I meant it's Socotra. I meant. Sorry, my bad.
Oh, so I didn't provision in Socotra. I know that you can, but it would be very basic. It will be it will be local market, local produce, some local meat or whatever they import from Oman. Very basic would be my expectation. Although, the tourism industry is growing there every year. So maybe it's gotten better. They might have, and again, with Emirati control, they have Emirati wireless network. There might be a supermarket. But, Ghanem Masakotri, the agent there, also very helpful guy and very responsive. So, if you write to him with whatever questions you have, I'm sure he'll set you up. They can get they can get things from Oman because of the ferry. They can get things and the ferry goes to Salalah, which I wish was easier for us. I mean, I would have loved to stop in Salalah. It's a beautiful port. I've spent time there. A very good friend of mine actually knows the owner of the marina in Salalah. They have a brand new marina with a real estate development. She owns property there. Even the owner of the marina, through her, could not get me clear information on whether I could enter the port of Salalah or not. And apparently the story is, and a friend of mine's working in Salalah right now, another friend, she says that the port will not allow basically any foreign flagged vessels unless they'll check them in as commercial vessels. So, and they're going to charge you the same fees. So unless you get information that's really unambiguous and kind of, clear to the contrary, I would not stop at Salalah unless you really, really have to.
So I would just add on the Red Sea pilot, you can get that available as an ebook.
Yeah.
I'll post the link in the community chat.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
David?
Yeah, great to have.
Like a new edition.
Yeah, new edition.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a new edition.
Yeah, they just updated it.
Wow. Okay, awesome.
Well, extremely helpful, Richard, and very thorough. So appreciate all the detail. Like it was I think exactly what we needed here, kind of that firsthand experience. So I think we've covered all the bases here. So if there is nothing else, I just want to thank you on behalf of the group.
Exploring places far and near.